Hey, what's up? This is Todd Smith. I'm back with another video. In my previous video, I talked about hardware. Some of the major aspects I love about hardware and why I think you might want some hardware in your studio. Today we put the shoe on the other foot and we talk about software. And I feel the benefits of using software in your setup. I'm a hybrid man. I use hardware and software, so it's very easy for me to have grounds on both ends of the spectrum that I feel are strong points. If you missed my previous video about hardware, I will link it down below in the video description. Feel free to click it. But before we jump into software, I need to thank you for taking the time to view this video and my patrons of this channel. Without your views and their support, I wouldn't have motivation to pump out content pretty much every single day, push my dreams forward, and I can't thank you enough for that motivation. Jumping back into the idea of software and the strong points of software, the first thing that really stands out to me is not having to deal with wires. Unless you have a really optimized setup when you have a lot of gear, even with my small amount of gear, if I want to swap things around, rewire things, it can take a good amount of time, and by the time I get that all done, sometimes my drive to make music and the concept that I had when I want to do that with the gear is a little bit diminished from the time when I started wiring everything together. Another aspect that links to this is the ability to save everything. Yes, you can save presets and stuff on digital synthesizers and analog/digital hybrids and things of that nature, but you still have to save them on each individual synth, boot them up, load up those presets, wherein generally within the software world, everything's saved in one big save file, one big bundle. You load it up, you have everything loaded, all the presets for countless instruments, which just in the end creates a faster workflow. And those first two smaller concepts flow into my first main concept, which is workflow. Yes, you can create a really nice workflow on hardware, especially if you start to limit the amount of hardware you're using and you don't get super huge within your studio. The bigger it gets, obviously, the more complex it gets on making an easy, fast, intuitive workflow. But I would argue on the fastest end of the fastest software workflow, it's going to be very hard for most hardware setups to compete. Yes, you can get around those things by limiting your gear and having less to do, but in the software world, you can be massively expansive and still have that quickness and workflow to go with. And in the world where you can save everything, at that point, you can start to save templates and concepts. I know I have a bunch of templates on Core Gadget if I know I want to make an electro-industrial sounding song, I have a bunch of synthesizers and the concepts already saved as a template on my file. If I want to go more ambient, I have a bunch of more ambient synths already set up, saved up, ready to go. I have a bunch of templates that I can just do, and that's something you obviously can't do in a room full of hardware. The next big thing is obviously price. You can get some amazing sounding software and some software with amazing capabilities at a really cheap price point compared to a lot of its hardware counterparts because they don't have to deal with building the actual hardware. A while back, you had to deal with maybe lacking within the sound if it was trying to recreate analog style stuff, but today it's sounding more and more like the real thing. There is some amazing virtual analog software stuff out there within the software world, only getting better day by day, and it's only going to sound more and more like the real thing as software evolves. So the old argument that you're not getting the sound that you're getting from hardware is becoming a harder and harder argument to make, and really only applies for a small niche of electronic musicians and the ones that really love analog pathways. There's a slew of digital artists that thrive in the digital world and don't even really focus on that aspect at all. Another major benefit is size. Obviously, even the smallest synthesizers, once you start to amass a lot of them, are going to take up a lot more space than a software-based setup, or something that has software into it that can actually absorb some of the pieces that you would have to buy for if you were only hardware. So whether you go 100% software or just go hybrid software, it's going to cut down on the hardware pieces that you're going to need physically, and then in return, you'll need a smaller setup and less space. And this translates into playing live. I mean, the idea of playing with a bunch of synthesizers live sounds appealing and it's something I would love to do someday, but in reality, that's not going to be my first gig. I won't be able to do that. Again, even the smallest hardware pieces are in general a lot more to carry out and to bring and to deal with in a live setup than if you have some software. And you may personally feel that electronic music is better with live gear, electronic gear, and things of that hardware, things of that nature. But the fact is, very few fans, if almost none, actually care or even think about that. The people listening and absorbing the music. And then even when it comes down to musicians, a very small niche of musicians even care about that at all. So in the large scope of the musical spectrum, you going on stage with software and some hardware isn't going to make you any less cool than somebody going up with a bunch of modular gear that's only for a very niche spectrum of fans. So all these are just some various aspects of software that I feel are very powerful, and the reason why I have a hybrid setup and you see some software evolved in with my hardware setup. I don't think I could ever be 100% hardware. I don't think I could ever be 100% software at this point within, musical creation and evolution and the technology that we have available to us. Feel free to give your reasons on why you feel software is nice to introduce into your setup, whether that be 100% or hybrid. Feel free to drop it down below. I'd love to hear your opinion. And as always, stay positive, stay creative, support each other. In peace.